So, are furries crazy?
No.
Yep.
A little.
Okay, if you've ever seen my talk before, this is a lot of new data, all right?
Woo, data.
This is based on questions that we have never been allowed to ask until now. So, first of all, are furries crazy?
Yep.
Yeah. In terms of self-esteem, comparing furries and non-furries, no difference. Comparing life satisfaction, comparing furries to non-furries, no difference. Anxiety, comparing furries to non-furries, no difference. Being a furry had no relationship with your self-esteem, with your psychological well-being, with your relationship well-being. But being a furry, the more furry you were, the more likely you had a positive, well-defined sense of who you were compared to non-furries. Being a furry is associated with a history of bullying, but nonetheless, even though you experienced this thing in childhood that ought to have screwed you up, furries on average don't seem to differ from the average person.
Woohoo! Thicker skin!
No.
Thicker fur.
No.
Thicker fur!
Part of the reason we suspect is because you find the furry fandom and you find an accepting community to belong to, where you can be safe and free to be who you are.
Woohoo! Alcoholics Anonymous!
Several of our published papers have been on this subject. This is a remarkable finding to psychologists that even in a group as stigmatized as furries, identifying with furry is still a good thing. Belonging to a community of like-minded others, even if that community is hated by the world around them, still confers a benefit. Yes.
Do you think that there's any sort of correlation between that? The fact that we as furries are so heavily stigmatized, does that in fact cause us to become more of an insular group?
I would think so, yes. It's one of the reasons why furries are so non-judgmental or very open in the fandom, because you don't want to be the bully. You took a lot of crap in high school. Why would you do it to someone else?
Well, it could be that we want to be open to everyone because we're trying to protect the image so badly.
Possibility as well. Hey, just to move along, keep it going. Do furries think differently from those around them?
Yes.
Furries are much more likely to possess magical beliefs. This is where this slide should have been. Aberrant salience. This means thinking in a way that's not normal. Furries are much more likely to attribute greater significance to things around them, to feel that they have a greater sense of understanding of the world around them, and to feel that they have heightened emotions, heightened senses. They're more aware of their thinking than those around them. They believe this. They're much more likely to have vivid mental imagery. So the images that you come up with in your head feel very, very vivid, very real to you.
Acid.
And they're much more likely to experience hallucinations.
Do you think that has to do with some entitlement, or do you think entitlement has to do with some of this?
I hadn't thought about a relationship between the two of those. Hey, 15 minutes.
Hey Nuka, quick question.
Yes.
On the top with the salience, is that what we think or is that observed?
What we think. Again, furries like to think that they know the world around them, that they understand themselves better. There's no evidence to suggest that they do actually have these, but they like to think they do.
Okay.
And just so you know, in terms of identity formation, thinking about your thinking, which is called a second-order reflexivity, is actually one of the things that is instrumental in developing what's known as ego identity. And so it's like the first fundamental step in resolving the identity crisis. So the thinking about your thinking is one of the keys to understanding why people are more identity resolving.
So here's the really controversial data. Here's the one we couldn't get past ethics forever. I'm showing it, and it's interesting. So, all right, I'll show it. So first of all, we asked furries, are you on psychiatric medication, or have you ever been? 37.3% of furries are or have been on psychiatric medication currently. This is a number that does not, it's hard to compare it to the general population because we don't actually have a good number of how many people in the general population experience or are on psychiatric medication. So we don't know, but we do know that about 37% of furries report being on some kind of medication.
Conjecture.
Yes.
What is it? What ballpark figure? What do you think?
I don't think this differs significantly. I think this is pretty comparable to the general population.
Well, in terms of just depression alone, it's estimated that anywhere between 10 and 25% of people have significant clinical depression, whether it's treated or not. And that's not even the most significantly prevalent form of mental health issues. Usually anxiety issues, which would also require medication for most people.
To speak to specific conditions, actually.
Yeah.
So, do furries have ADD?
Squirrel!
Wow. 92% of furries have been diagnosed with ADD. This does not differ significantly from the general population. Furries are no more likely than the general population to have ADD. 6.1% of furries have been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. This is actually significantly lower than the general population.
That's what I was talking about with that.
Wow.
16.1% of furries have been diagnosed with depression. This does not differ significantly from the general population. There is only one condition that we found where furries are greater than the general population.
Happiness.
Asperger's, yep. I can believe that. I would say
Back in there.
Male furries, at the most conservative estimate we have, are at least 2.25 times more likely than the general population to have been diagnosed with Asperger's.
yep.
I don't want to mention Furries because I'll feel like an asshole.
I know like 12 people that have it.
We haven't looked at the numbers for bronies. Yes.
Probably about the same.
Yes, so this is actually controlled. Now, this is why I say males here. So we had to separate them out because males are much more likely in the general population to have been diagnosed. So we actually didn't have any. First of all, females are relatively rare in the fandom to begin with. Well, they're 4 times less likely to be a female in the fandom. And then you're looking for something relatively rare to begin with. So we actually had no female furries in our sample who had Asperger's.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
So
Small
They
sample.
went to the wrong con.
yes, it's almost 1,000 people from Oklacon.
Oh,
So
They
yes,
gotta
we
go
only
to,
actually have data on male
That's the
furries with
highest-
Asperger's.
that's
Yes.
the highest
Have you
female
investigated to
identity.
see if furries reported they were more likely to seek
It
clinical
is the
help
highest concentration.
We
if
haven't.
they felt they needed it?
They're next
We actually haven't. It would be based on what Dr. Roberts has found in some of her research, or some of the paper that we published. It suggests that there's a lot of reasons why furries are apprehensive about going to a clinical psychologist to
They
seek
think
help.
it's less. They're not coming from common furries.
That's exactly what
That's
happens.
exactly what it is.
What was that?
So, a lot of furries are hesitant to go to a clinical psychologist, and part of the reason, based on research we got here at Oklacon last year, a lot of furries very strongly feel that they don't want to go to a clinical psychologist because you walk into a psychologist and say, I'm feeling, I have a lot of problems that I need to talk about, and the psychologist says, okay, tell me a little bit about yourself, and they say, okay, well, I'm a furry, and they say, stop right there. That's a problem. Oh, no, so first they say, what's a furry? And you say, well, you describe it, and they say, that's your problem right there. It's not your depression, it's not your schizophrenia, it's not any of these things. Furry's the problem.
Working through childhood abuse or any of that stuff, it's the fact that you're a furry that's the problem.
And do you want to tell a story about the publication? This publication?
Publication, rejection letter. Dear Dr. Roberts, wasting our time is really unprofessional.
That was our one-line rejection from the first clinical journal that we submitted to.
Wow.
It's unprofessional to waste our time with the submission.
Did you frame it to rub it in their nose later?
I'm going to put it on the back of my first book.
I showed her that today.
That's how you do it.
That's how you do
We
it.
have since then gotten published.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pull a Chris Hitchens with this one. It's going on the back of the book.
So, now keep in mind, going back to Asperger's thing, so furries are more likely than the general population of Asperger's. But in spite of this, furries report no significant decrease in their well-being, their life satisfaction, how happy they are, how good they feel about themselves. In spite of the fact that they were bullied in general when they were younger, and in spite of the fact that they have a condition here that might really significantly affect their ability to sort of, feel good about themselves or to experience sort of a satisfied, healthy life. Yes?
Is that different for non-furry Asperger's?
I don't know that one actually. Admittedly, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I could if I were to speak to that, I would be speaking outside my field. So I don't feel comfortable answering that. That's not satisfactory, but
Don't know.
yeah.
Don't know is a perfectly reasonable answer.
So some of our research right now that
Question in
we're
the
trying to
back.
publish is based on this idea that the furry fandom has this really restorative or helping effect on people. Yes.
Is there any, and I apologize if I get this term wrong, is there any question whether this relates to the hedonistic treadmill?
The hedonistic treadmill?
Yeah, the idea that a person...
Explain it.
Yeah, explain the hedonistic treadmill.
The idea is that a person's well-being and happiness varies within some slight range, but is generally adapted to depending on their circumstances. If you're in bad circumstances, you're still generally as happy or as sad as if you're in good circumstances, depending on what your surroundings are.
That's a possible explanation. I hadn't considered it, and that's actually a very legitimate explanation. That's an empirical question. We have to test it. But that's a really good alternative explanation, and I like that. Thank you. Yeah.
I have.
Congratulations, you now have one.
You are the one for.
First female with Asperger's to be banned in the
This
family.
card's against you. It makes you.
You are unique. Anyway.
I'm also a wolf spirit. The only one in the fandom.
Anyways, continuing on. Moving along. Sharon's freezing.
I'm freezing.
Arthurian's crazy. There's a lot of stigma felt towards
Ooh,
Arthurians.
that's touchy.
Come on, guys. Remember, 20% of the people in this crowd, statistically, are Arthurians. Don't say things.
Some of them may not even know.
Yeah.
That's actually true. A lot
So-
of people walked away from our talks like, wow,
I learned something about myself today. So, we do find that Therians, in general, tend to really struggle with the idea of having a clear sense of who they are. This may be part of the reason why they feel identifying with an animal, or they say that part of me should be expressed by an animal, because they're really struggling to sort of come to terms with who am I, what makes up this coherent sense of who I am. They do have more vivid magical ideation. They are more likely than the average furry to have magical beliefs. They have even more vivid mental images and experiences than the average furry does, who in turn has more vivid mental images than the general population. They are also more likely to have experienced hallucinations or altered states of reality. They are more likely to experience aberrant salience, as I mentioned it before. And they have, in general, a slightly reduced self-esteem and a slightly reduced life satisfaction compared to furries. Slight. It's not a huge effect, but it's a small effect. And part of that may be owing to the fact that they're still struggling to, again, on average, still struggling to figure out sort of who they are. Alright, there's some research that we've been trying to do at Anthrocon that was looking at, when you go to the clinical literature, they say that lycanthropy, the feeling of werewolfism, or feeling that you turn into a wolf, they say that people who have this are crazy. If you show these symptoms, you are having a hallucination and you are a crazy person. This is associated with schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder or something.
There's nothing good ever said about it.
Ever said. Now what we're saying, what we've been trying to study, is this idea that, well, wait a minute, if you're a Therian and this is something that helps you make sense of who you are and make meaning in the world, you can't say that thinking that you identify with a wolf is a bad thing. Like, how does that make you crazy if that's helping you sort of figure out who you are and create a coherent sense of identity? So we looked at just the symptoms, and we find that, dumb it down a little bit. So the biggest problem, so even though people who are Therian have some of these sort of weird little quirky sort of ways of thinking, we find that it is a problem that they experience more hallucinations. That tends to be a not so great thing, and the fact that they struggle to try and figure out who they are is not such a great thing for their well-being, but the fact that they have magical beliefs doesn't make them crazy, and it doesn't predict any kind of negative well-being. The fact that they have aberrant salience, that they think differently from the average person, doesn't make them crazy. It doesn't have any negative effect on how psychologically healthy they are. And actually having more vivid thoughts and more sensory experiences increases their well-being. They're happier with the world. Their happies are happier than the average person's happy. To put it very, sort of simply. So the symptoms aren't necessarily bad. You can't say definitively that, because you have these symptoms, they're bad things. You have to break it apart because some things are actually quite good. And in some ways, it's actually, improves your life satisfaction, or at least has no effect on your life satisfaction and how sort of well you're doing.